thinking of a master plan. This ain't nothing but sweat inside my hands, so I dig into it.
I've always thought about my master plan. Welcome to the Hip Hop Mind. It is an intellectual analysis of hip hop music from my perspective and the evolution of hip hop. My name is Sharon Nikki. I'm a 60-year-old African American woman that was raised in the Bronx. I grew up in Lambert houses, and the train stop is West Farm Square and East Tremont Avenue on the number 2 and the number 5 lines. And I remember going to the T Connection and going to Africa Bambaataa and the Zulu Nation jams and Bronx River. And that's what we used to call hip hop parties back then, jams. So I remember going to all of those jams, and I saw hip hop when it was beginning. So I'm excited to talk about my perspective on hip hop. So let's get into it. Let's get into Rakim's Thinking of a Master Plan. That line has, from the first time I heard it, it has stuck with me. And I've actually evolved because of that one line, because it is so profound, but it's simple. Thinking of a master plan. I mean, for me, hip hop is the embodiment of that statement, because it was young people getting together, thinking of a master plan. Like, how do we express ourselves with our music? You know, because when we came up, disco was very prominent, R&B music and soul music was prominent, but you know, we wanted to have our own voice in how we experienced music, and hip hop was born. And it is a master plan when you think about it, because the master plan was, one, to just have our own voice, but then the beautiful side effect was that it created a movement. It created a new wealth. So let's get into it. Rakim was born William Michael Griffin Jr. in 1968 in Long Island. And his mom was a jazz singer, and she would, not only a jazz singer, but she was also an opera singer, and she would be singing music and listening to John Coltrane records. And young William was absorbing all of this information. And he grew up to who we now know as MC God, Rakim. And all of his lines, not just Thinking of a Master Plan, but all of his rhymes are all philosophical thoughts. But let me just talk about Thinking of a Master Plan. Like, this simple but profound line is the school of thought for so many famous philosophers. Let me go back. So, like, we can talk about, and we'll just go surface. So we can talk about the important figures in African American history that had this thought of thinking of a master plan. The first one that comes to mind would be Martin Luther King. You know, he had a dream. His master plan was that one day we would all be free and equal, and we would be judged by the content of our skin. I mean, you know, some people may argue that it didn't fully come true, but it mostly did. You know, it is now against the law to treat African American people cruelly. So his master plan kind of came to life. And then we think about Malcolm X. You know, Malcolm X, you know, had a very impactful life. And it didn't start off like perfect. It was hard, you know, like he did time, he went to jail, and he found God in jail. And that was where his life changed dramatically, and he became the person that we now know as Malcolm X. It is all still, part of this master plan. You know, his master plan was to become greater, to have an identity, to have respect for himself and his fellow man. And it was wonderful. And then, you know, we start to go into some of the philosophers, and Aristotle definitely had this school of thought of thinking of a master plan, this self-knowledge, self-identity, understanding oneself. And you can only think of a master plan if you understand yourself. So it was really great. And then, let's get back into the music part of it. You know, jazz and rap are interconnected. So there's evidence in jazz where you had some jazz artists that use like spoken word infuse into their jazz music. Cap Calloway comes to mind. He would be now, what we call a hype man because he would use his words to move the crowd, so to speak, and get them interested. And then you had Gil Scott Heron, which, everybody remembers, his famous song or, spoken word, "The revolution must be televised," and he did it over music. And for me, when I see those interconnections, this is the beautiful evolution of rap music, how it all began. And then, later in other episodes, we'll talk about like where it's going. So, Rakim, you know, thinking of a master plan again, loving that, and also understanding and learning that Rakim was also a follower of the 5% Nation, and that was founded by an ex-Nation of Islam member known as, I believe his name is Clarence 13X. And it wasn't so much a religion, it was more of a movement, teaching young people, young African American people, how to, have their own identity, have respect for themselves, have a foundation to build their own communities and not rely on external factors from, from the world, and just have sense of self. And learning all of this about Rakim, or William, if I could be so bold, really explains about how he came up with all of his rhymes. But, for me specifically, thinking of a master plan is so profound because I've always been attracted to people that had thoughts of the future or had thoughts of how to put together some kind of plan to get something going. Like, I've always enjoyed that. I grew up in mostly a male-dominated household. My mom is one of five, and she has four brothers, and she's the youngest. My dad is, Trinidadian. So I've had always like very powerful men that thought about the future, that did things. Like my uncle went to North Carolina AT&T, and he went on to have a wonderful career. My other uncle similarly. So I've always been intrigued about and excited about thinking of a master plan. Like, it's exciting. So right now, that's all I have to say about thinking of a master plan. Oh, one more thing. My master plan is this podcast, and it came up through therapy. In my conversations with my therapist, I was, kind of complaining about, oh, I need to find a better job because I need better health insurance. And my therapist asked me, he was like, what is it that you really want to do? And I said, I would like a talk show to talk about rap music because I grew up with it from the beginning and I just love it. And that's what I want to do. So thank you for listening to the Hip Hop Mind. My name is Sharon Nikki. Until next time.